strong governance system on Flare that literally doesn't exist on most large networks, right? Like if you want to change something on Ethereum, there's no governance vote. There's a cabal of engineers, fantastic researchers, but they decide whether Ethereum moves to proof of stake. And you go along with it or you fork the blockchain. With Flare, we give the ability to the community to vote. But we've tried to structure the governance in as logical manner as possible. If you look at Ethereum, the governance really happens amongst a very small set of people. What we're trying to do is to have a governance system which allows for changes, but also, and this is a really important point that people haven't necessarily picked up on, that doesn't also suffer from one of the core problems of democracy, which is a tyranny of the majority. So essentially, Flare is hard to change over time, but if there is a deep will to change it, then it can be changed. And on the other side, if a vote comes from the foundation, if there is a deep will not to follow the foundation, then that also can't happen. So the foundation can be overruled. And that is kind of the philosophy behind our governance mechanisms.
Welcome to the DeFi Standard, and this is Mickey B. Fresh. So I've received a number of questions and been tagged in Twitter posts regarding Songbird's governance and the overall structure of the way governance is done on the Flare network, but specifically around the call for this decentralization of Songbird, claiming that it's centralized. So I just want to explain how the governance structure is set up and why it's set up in the way it is, and no, it shouldn't be changed. Songbird Network is there as a canary network. It's a test bed. So the reason why the threshold is 50% of a vote and then 75% have to turn out. So why is that so high? And people see that, well, if the Flare team has almost more than 25%, then nothing is going to go through. The foundation can't vote. So it's hard to change the network on purpose. If we had just everyone could put a proposal up, or even if it was 50% majority with no minimum on Songbird test proposals, we'd have test proposals not go through because people are voting, but they don't even know what they're voting against because it's a test proposal. That's the point of it. So, but let me explain why. It's understandable why people have concern or see on the surface that, oh, the foundation, the threshold is so high. So on Songbird, we have Songbird test proposals. On Flare, there's Flare improvement proposals. Songbird is the canary network to Flare. It's there to serve as that canary network for Flare, to serve it. So the foundation throughout beta, so beta period is probably for another 6 months or so, can put up proposals whenever they see fit. Now, they built the network. They've been working on this for 5 years. And layer 1 networks typically don't have embedded governance on-chain built with DAO smart contracts into it. Ethereum does not have that. Ethereum has a group of developers make a decision. If you don't like it, tough luck, or you fork the protocol. Bitcoin does not have governance. Very similar. Now, a lot of people claim that's what makes it decentralized, and that's just covering up for a lack of implementing governance. But on the other end of the spectrum, having a mob rule where it's just like anyone can throw proposals up there, and if they get 50% vote, they're past it, is not the way that governance on layer 1 should be set up. Layer 1s are hard to change because they're layer 1s, and people have to build infrastructure on these networks. But we all know that things need to be improved and enhanced as technology improves, as a market evolves and grows and expands. Things need to be changed and enhanced. And Flare's governance structure is set up so that after beta, community will have the lower house of governance.
Strong governance system on Flare that literally doesn't exist on most large networks, right? Like if you want to change something on Ethereum, there's no governance vote. There's a cabal of engineers, fantastic engineers, fantastic researchers, I will say that much. But they decide whether Ethereum moves to proof of stake. And you go along with it or you fork the blockchain. With Flare, we give the ability to the community to vote not only on what the foundation is proposing, and initially we're just starting with voting on what the foundation is proposing, but later, after Flare exits beta mode, the community will be able to propose changes. And that is, there are other blockchains with governance, but we've tried to structure the governance in as logical manner as possible, such that we don't fall into the trap of other blockchains. For instance, if you look at Bitcoin, it's almost impossible to change things. If you look at Ethereum, the governance really happens amongst a very small set of people. What we're trying to do is to have a governance system which allows for changes, but also, and this is a really important point that people haven't necessarily picked up on, that doesn't also suffer from one of the core problems of democracy, which is a tyranny of the majority. So essentially, Flare is hard to change over time, but if there is a deep will to change it, then it can be changed. And on the other side, if a vote comes from the foundation, if there is a deep will not to follow the foundation, then that also can't happen. So the foundation can be overruled. And that is kind of the philosophy behind our governance mechanisms.
Now, with the community proposals, it's going to be done in a really interesting way, because it's going to get the true sentiment of the community, of how they feel. On Songbird, there will be a community debate beforehand, and then people will stake behind a number of community proposals. So they won't be putting at risk their SGB value. They'll be putting up the rewards from the FTSO over a period of time. And they stake behind a proposal. So they're not really voting. They're staking their assets. They're still the FTSO rewards are getting earned, but they're not able to access them. They stay in a smart contract for everybody. And whichever proposal has the most assets staked at the end of that period is the winning proposal. Therefore, it would then go to Flare to get voted on, and if it meets, and it's got to meet certain conditions, so it's not just a 50% threshold like the regular when the foundation does it. It's under certain categories. So it's hard to change on purpose unless there's a strong will to change it. Certain things, consensus, and certain things with the FTSO has to have sometimes a supermajority or a minimum turnout. Some things could be 50% just depending on what it is, the proposal. And that's the chance for the community to participate.
But it's essentially around governance. So at the moment on the Flare network, the foundation submits potential governance proposals, and the users can vote yes or no. Once Flare exits what we call beta stage, where it transitions out of this early stage into essentially what we consider to be a mature, structured network, then community governance also becomes a thing. Flare has a second network called Songbird, which is our canary network. And community governance has a two-house system. Songbird is the lower house, Flare as the upper house. If people understand British or American politics, you would think of it as the House of Representatives and the Senate. When a community governance proposal, when someone wants to make a community governance proposal, they put that proposal on Songbird. Other people in the community can stake to it with their Songbird token. If it wins a community governance round, so there are 4 per year, that proposal must win by amassing the largest amount of stake. It can then be transferred to Flare for a final vote to approve or deny. So that's how our governance system works. Our governance system is broadly based around the idea that we don't want mob rule, meaning just a basic 50%, of people that turn up shouldn't be able to make huge changes on the network, because this is systems need to be stable, developers need to know how the network works, and they can't have it changing all the time. But governance exists really to, when there's a big, very well supported change that needs to happen, then community governance can force that change to happen. So that's the second role. So delegation to FTSOs, governance, of course it's the network's transaction token, and then of course it will be used over time, I would assume, in lots of applications.
But we're a layer 1 blockchain, so it's not like a DAO, a typical DAO application that runs on top of blockchains. This is a layer 1 infrastructure, and every token comes with this governance vote power. Unlike other networks, Flare's FLR does not have to be held or staked to vote. It can be utilized in earning FTSO rewards and simultaneously vote in governance. And it can simultaneously be used as collateral. Something like Algorand, you can't use the asset as collateral, earn network rewards, and also vote in governance. So I'm just picking that as an example. And governance is very difficult for layer 1s because of this. And most of the time it's staked in proof-of-stake networks to a validator, and then they just vote for them. So Flare has allowed it so everybody can vote. And the process enables the Flare Foundation, Flare, and Songbird community members to propose policy changes, vote on them, and execute if accepted. So it's automatically accepted. Flare has this built-in DAO contract called the Governor, and it manages all the governance settings, and it talks to the other contracts. Blockchains don't have embedded, pre-compiled, high-powered contracts like this. This is unique because Flare runs on Avalanche's C chain, not on Avalanche's, but a forked version of Avalanche's architecture, which allows for high-powered, EVM-based smart contracts to run in a separate environment from the consensus, which is on the P chain. So this allows them to not have to worry about the consensus and the underlying. So that's all happening on the P chain. And you don't have to worry about the technicals there, but this is how they can create DApp and DAO-like functions, but on a layer 1. But it's still a layer 1. So we don't want to make drastic changes where anyone can put up a proposal and whoever shows up just passes. That would be like mob rule. He describes it as. So as you see in these videos, there are improvement proposals on Songbird. They're rare, and we have one right now actually. And it's really just to align the smart contracts with the FIP01. So you won't see these too often unless, Songbird changes in the future from just a canary network to either a layer 2 to Flare, or a constellation network, or subnet, whatever it becomes in the future, we don't know. But you won't see many SIPs, which is Songbird improvement proposals, he understands why it's been misunderstood by the community. And we're so used to looking at something, well, that's not decentralized, and that's centralized. It's not so black and white. And governance is something that is, decentralized governance is an ongoing, we're at the forefront. There's no track record or history of how governance has turned out on any network. So we never had decentralized community-run networks. There's no administrator. Now, the off-chain governance takes place if all the validators agree that, oh, we got to change the code, and then everyone spins up a different code, then that kind of like forks it. Some networks work like that. XRP works kind of like that, but they have an on-chain process. Flare is mostly on-chain, but it could do off-chain things if there was an emergency or certain other aspects. But for the time being, for this topic of conversation, it's important to understand that the test proposal is different. So to increase the swiftness at which new proposals can be tested on Songbird, STPs are accepted by default, meaning they are rejected only if enough votes are cast against them. And that's very difficult to do. So most of those, they're test proposals. That's the point. So the fact it's just a novelty kind of having a vote to put them up there, because I think sometimes people, because they own SGB, feel like their investment here, well, why don't they have a say? But your SGB is part of Flare Network. It's this subordinate to Flare. It's the lower house of governance, and it's there to serve Flare. So the available votes depend on the amount of valid wrap tokens you have, not the native tokens. Now that's with the FIPs. With the STPs, it's based on the total amount of FLR. So those are going to go through the default. So expect that. They're test proposals. We need to test new enhancements and things that the foundation's working on. Are you working on building anything that you're going to implement? So, they're there they built the network. They're going to be implementing tests. If we don't like that proposal, right? Say on Songbird, they test it. You don't like the way it works. It's either buggy or it's just something that we don't want. On Flare, then, when the vote happens, there'll be a community debate. We could talk about these things. We could then say, hey, here's the reasons why. And we could point to, well, this experience here, the way they do it on that network is probably better. So you know what? Let's put a new Songbird test proposal, and Flare Foundation listens, and they put out reports saying this is why we're doing this, or why we'd like to implement this. Have test proposals not go through because people are voting, but they don't even know what they're voting against because it's a test proposal. That's the point of it. So no, it's not centralized, and no, it should not be changed because that's the point of it. And if there ever was something that we really didn't want, there could be a strong effort made, because over time there'll be less and less control by the Flare entities. And the Foundation's tokens are not able to vote. So it's questionable if they even have enough to just overcome it. But they didn't even vote in FIP01. So that's another thing. There's no rational logic to why there's any reason why they're going to do something that's not best for the network. Not in this beta stage, at least. They just spent 5 years building this thing. And you saw in FIP01 how evenly spread out and overwhelming dominance, though, evenly spread out amongst the wallet holders of the amount of FLR they held, or WFLR, that voted in favor. 93%, I think it was. That's a landslide. And it goes to show that there's a lot of loud voices there were who wanted to take their profits and wanted to get just, free handout every month and spoke out against that. But the people who actually want to participate, who held their Flare, they saw that this was the right move. So that's why we got to be careful with what the sentiment is when you see Twitter. Twitter's a great source of communications and a message board, but it's not a good source of representing the sentiment of the whole community. And I've noticed before that sometimes you could see a narrative and you think like, oh, everyone's thinking like that. And it's really not. It's just a group or people who have a strong feeling of something. This is why community proposals are going to be dictated based on SGB staking it. Now, you're not putting your SGB on the line. It's not at risk. So after beta, there will be 4 proposals per year that on Songbird would be proposed for Flare, though. That's what the point of it is. So before that, each of those periods commence, there'll be a debate. There'll be a community governance forum, and people can make suggestions, and we could talk about it, like, and different groups, and come up with, well, what is something that we really need to change, and what would be the best logical way to go about it, and what did we see that other network does that we can implement, but in Flare, best for Flare, or what new technologies out there we want to implement, and then have a discussion about it, and have an open forum. And there might be things that come along that, well, I like this, but that we need first, and that might be the first thing. And this is where putting stake on the line, not even stake, you're putting your future yield up. That's what you're really putting up, because your SGB be staked behind a specific proposal that you choose. You don't have to participate, but if you choose to, you're not risking your SGB. You're putting your SGB FTSO rewards for the next, like, I'm not sure what the time period they can do, but say a month or 2. Those rewards, how many epochs it is, on the line. Where if your proposal gets the most stake, so you're really not voting, it's just a matter of stake. So whatever proposal gets the most stake behind it, and there's still some details they got to release, which we won't be able to do this till after beta, which is about 6 months. That's when the validators will be live, the network will be mature, all the protocols will be built out, the state connector, the FTSO will be fully implemented, and we'll start to see those bridges come to the network. Right now, we don't have the bridges. We don't have the full implementation of everything. This is a huge, highly advanced network that's trying to solve one of the biggest problems in all blockchain. It's not going to be rushed. So that's why the applications and spinning up, we will see that as the 2 networks align. Now with this new SIP that they could test now on Songbird and know, a dApp developer, that, hey, this is the same contracts that are on Flare. So I could test here, go right there. It hasn't been like that since FIP 1.3, FIP 0.1. So the community proposals, everyone would stake behind a proposal after having a discussion. Like, there would be an open forum, people make suggestions, you could talk, it might be your micro communities within the communities, and then people, even influencer content providers, to talk about this stuff. Like, oh, this is the thing, that this is why it's better. And the motivation behind it will be whoever votes knows that they're putting up their rewards. So if they just go to put up behind some proposal that's going to benefit some other token that they own, and they know that, well, they'll lose their rewards just for trying to push people to vote behind a proposal that really is not best for the network, but it benefits them. So you won't see those type of proposals because nobody will put their rewards on the line. By putting value on the line, now you get the real accuracy. And this is based on a little prediction markets here. And fuckery, I think it's called futarchery is the word. It's a concept of, I don't want to go into that right now. Well, I'm going to do another video that's on prediction markets and betting and auctions, because that's going to be a big thing on Flare and interests me a lot. And I think with the oracles there and data provisioning, we could see a lot. But this is kind of a version of that. So what do I mean by that? By you putting up stake, you earn FTSO rewards continuously. And now you don't receive those. They're held in a smart contract. So each stake, each one's like a staking pool you're going to put behind this proposal. Say, let's take, for example, what would that be? Say we want to expand to a whole nother FTSO, right? We want a whole other set of FTSOs for whatever reason. Somebody came up with an idea of why we need this. And they put together a cost structure, what it costs for infrastructure provider to put it together, how it would benefit the network, this and that. Say you want to put it behind that. And then there's another proposal that's maybe slimmer and not as complex, but it's really needed. And you like both of them. But you're like, well, which one is probably more likely everyone else is going to go for? So that's why you got to think, because your rewards, you'll lose them if your proposal doesn't win. But the proposal that wins, you're not voting, remember, just the most staked. It will go to Flare then for a vote. If it passes on Flare, based on the threshold of its category now, so it's not even 50% just, depending on what the proposal's for, is an outline structure of what it needs as a minimum turnout and what it needs as a threshold of majority or supermajority or supermajority. And those are defined in the Flare white paper. And, you know, we're talking like the supermajorities, like consensus changes, things that most likely not going to be put up by the community. So if it passes then on Flare, the proposal that was staked, that had the most staked, then earns all the FTSO rewards from all the other proposals that people staked behind. Goes to those people, plus what they initially earned. If it does not pass Flare, though, then the proposal that won on Songbird, all their FTSO rewards go to all the losing proposals on Songbird, which is pretty interesting, I think, because it might not pass on Flare. And I think that's when really you'll see the real governance in action. And it's a layer one, so it's why 4 times a year proposals, it's not like MakerDAO or something like Aave. We got all these proposals going up, or say we want to vote on to expand the FTSO to include more data series and different things and enhance it in certain ways. It'd be tested on Flare first and then brought in. And it's different than, see, like with XRP Ledger, all those amendments and everything, a lot of those are proposed by Ripple. So the foundation's still going to be putting up all the proposals that are just obvious or that are suggested to them or that, you know, they bring up. I do think that we need a little of a town hall like community place where they talk about ideas that they're doing in the future, instead of it being a mystery. Like, hey, lay out, here's the tech. Let us know how exactly the whole state connector, the attesters, the multi-chain clients, and how it can be expanded. How can we have more virtual machines and a constellation of Flares? Like, I think that's the next thing that most likely we'll probably have to vote on after beta. It looks like, because since Flare is based on Avalanche's infrastructure, its architecture, which is, I think, a huge advantage.